What's up, guys? We are back, and this is Nick Calagaromitros with the Paper Trails podcast for Albemarle Paper Supply. We are super pumped. We're actually here at a studio, first time here at this studio. Super pumped about recording, and so it's gonna be super excited. Like I said, episode 7 back at you, and so we missed a week. Our apologies. We got more things scheduled, and so very excited. We have actually becoming a good friend of mine. We have David Lucarelli as our guest. Thanks for coming on, David, and chatting with us. And so super pumped to have you. I know this is only the second time we've met, but definitely hit it off the first time, and I had a blast. Learning about your background and restaurants and, opening up restaurants and your travels. And I was like, literally at the end of our conversation, the conversation went so well. I said, David, I just started a podcast a couple months ago. We have to have you on, your stories, your travels, where you've been, things you've opened up. And so it's been exciting. And so glad to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. I've never done a podcast before, but my brother and sister have several under their belt, so this will be fun to send them.
Nice. That's awesome. That is awesome. So I guess we'll just start off, tell us about yourself, and just so you guys know, we are in Charlotte. Obviously our podcast is about entrepreneurship, food service, and just the hustle, the grind of making a name for yourself, not only in the food service industry, but obviously you can apply these principles in any industry. And David has had a lot of success here in Charlotte over the last couple of years with the Sabor.
Sure.
Sabor restaurants,
Yep.
Sabor Fusion.
Sabor Latin Street Grill.
Latin Street Grill, and so you have helped open up many stores. How many you guys have now?
We currently have 15.
Wow.
Yeah, and 2 in other states, and then really looking to kind of expand into either the Raleigh market or a little bit more into South Carolina.
And those are in Charlotte-esque?
Generally, they're right up and down 77 in Charlotte. So
Okay.
we start at Mooresville and we end in Fort Mill, but in between there, they're pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, and so like I said, we met, through a mutual friend of ours, and ended up chatting and just discussing business. We don't work together, with the paper company, but we just had an awesome conversation. And similar backgrounds with our parents owning restaurants,
Yeah.
and so I guess let's start there.
Sure.
Give us where you from?
Sure.
If you guys Lucarelli, that's Italian. If you got Calagaromitros, Lucarelli, these are all Italian,
Yeah.
Greek names, Mediterranean. So give us some of your background.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in an area called Melrose Park, and Melrose Park, and at that time in the late 60s was a really Italian neighborhood, and it was very ethnic, and it was very family-oriented, and it was all those things, and it was a great place to grow up. And I remember little bits and pieces about it, but I do remember just a very interesting sense of community, and one that I don't see quite as much anymore, and it's sad to say, but it is the case. And so grew up in Chicago, and my father got a job in Cleveland, so we left when I was in a third grade, I believe, and moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and of course Cleveland at that time was sort of the dying Rust Belt story. And my father worked in restaurants that were owned by a great guy that one of his mentors, I think, and so kind of grew up there and had it was a little bit more of a suburban lifestyle than it was urban in Chicago.
Sure. And so then your dad moved to Cleveland, got into the restaurants. How did?
Yeah, so he was in the restaurant business, and I would, routinely go and go to work with Dad and that kind of thing. I think it was a different time then, but he employed me as a host early on. So I would, have a little suit coat on, and I'd take people to the tables and give them their menus, and
Nice.
Everybody thought that was just the greatest thing. And so
Was it fine dining?
It was fine dining, yeah.
Okay.
It was old, kind of old steakhouse, pewter plates for the salad bar, the chilled, that whole thing, and And it was great. And you know, from that point on, I think I was kind of hooked in the restaurant business.
I know. I definitely get it. You know, we were talking just off camera about the same exact thing. I remember very young, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. You know, we would, you know, hang out in the office for as long as we could, playing tic-tac-toe with my younger brother or doing whatever we could. And then my dad needed some help. I would wrap baked potatoes or, you know, make drinks for the waitresses, or, you know, I would just go around and take pictures off. I remember when my dad opened up, I think maybe his 4th or 5th restaurant, you know, down in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And to get it started, you know, I remember leaving school at 3 o'clock on Friday, driving a couple hours away from, you know, we lived just north of Charlotte, down to Spartanburg, and, you know, going and helping Dad and just taking, like I said, pictures off of tables, water and sweet tea. I had a towel. I'd wipe down, you know, from all the condensation. So then, I remember just being an absolute, I remember all the other customers just looking, and, you know, maybe it was 10, 12, I don't remember, but
sure.
So I definitely know the feeling, and so
yeah. So you know, as I progressed through that, you know, that life, I eventually became a busboy, and so well, actually, my dad had hired me as a dishwasher, okay. And so I really wanted to do a great job. And so, as a dishwasher is a tough position to fill in the restaurant business. You know, anybody that's ever done it and done the job knows that it's probably the most important spot in the restaurant. And
underappreciated.
Underappreciated.
Big time.
And just not hard work, but it's you know, it's work that's repetitive and it's not too mind challenging. And so you need a certain type of person. So I all I wanted to do was be a busboy, because I didn't want to go to school smelling like the you know, the dishwashing machine every day. And so all I want, you know, so I would work really, really hard to, you know, do my best to be the best dishwasher I could possibly be. And what I found is that they wouldn't move me up because they liked me as a dishwasher so much. Sure. You know, I was 15, 14, or I think I was 15 at the time.
Nice.
And so all I wanted to do was be a busboy. And so finally I got to be a busboy. And you know, in a busboy job, you get to dress a little bit nicer. You know, you get cash tips at the time, sure. And so there was a lot of advantages to that. And so I did that so well that they ended up calling me Lightning Luke, which was kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, so I like being called Lightning Luke at that age, but I've done it all. I've done it all in the restaurant business, and I always say that, you know, growing up in the restaurant business, you learn to value and appreciate the employees that you work with. And I think that's one of the most critical things that I've taken with me over the years, is just sure. being able to value employees and have the respect of, you know, being able to sit down and talk to them one-on-one and look them in the eye and say, I understand your struggles and what can we do to be better? And, you know, that type of servant leadership today is critically important. We don't live in the same environment that we lived in, you know, even 20 years ago. The workforce has changed dramatically, and being able to appreciate people and their work and empathize and sympathize with what they have is a valuable tool.
100%. I agree. So, grew up in the restaurants. You're in Cleveland. Is that where you grew up the majority of your childhood?
Yeah. Grew up in Cleveland. Went to Catholic high school, and so you know, primarily you know, living that, you know, suburban quasi-Italian you know, life, and you know, eventually you know, pretty much worked in restaurants my whole high school career, and sure. Then when I went to college, same thing. You know, my parents were very interested in making sure that I knew the value of a dollar. So they, you know, I had to work my way through college, and I think there was some value to that. But I worked in a hotel and was a line cook and all that kind of stuff. And so so yeah, you know, like I always say, like, I've done it all in the restaurant business. Like, I was a valet, I was a waiter, I was a busboy, I was a dishwasher, and you know, I think that I really enjoyed and really kind of gravitated at that time to cooking and culinary arts.
Nice.
And partially because my father was always the manager. You know, was always a manager, and you know, at that time I think he was a VP or something, but. But you know, I didn't want to be out front with him. I wanted to be the guy in the back that was, you know, calling shots and that kind of thing. And
Nice.
so just fell in love with cooking and went to culinary school at Johnson & Wales in Providence, Rhode Island. And at that time, they had a advanced standing program, which was really good for me. So I managed to knock out their 2-year program in a 1 calendar year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you go from Cleveland to Rhode Island.
Yeah, just for a quick year in Rhode Island, and then you know, and then back to Cleveland, really, essentially to work in restaurants. And at that time, my father had kind of branched out on his own and sort of revitalized an area of Cleveland that was known as Playhouse Square, and it was kind of a dying theater district, and you know, the area needed an anchor like that. There were some beautiful turn of the century theaters that were just, you know, beautiful, but not a lot of restaurants, not a lot of shops. And at that time, Cleveland was really kind of in its lowest period. And so got to work at obviously, if he opened a restaurant, I was working there.
Of course.
Probably the best deal in town. And
Yeah.
so I worked for him there, and then he opened up a couple other restaurants that I, you know, eventually kind of moved up the ladder a little bit with
Nice.
those.
So you just worked in the family business for how long? How long were you a part of the?
I you know, as long as I could take it. And I think that one thing that I would tell people with family business is that the problem and the challenge is that, you know, every moment of your day and every moment of your life is centered around the business. You know, I remember clearly having Thanksgiving dinner, and all we talked about was the restaurant and the business, and I thought, you know, there's got to be something more than this, right? But at that point, I was already kind of hooked, so I decided that I wanted to see how you know, chain operations worked, and so I took a job with Morton's of Chicago and really learned a lot about how they manage all the critical functions and profit drivers of the restaurant business, and labor cost and food cost, and all this. You know, at that time the systems were all kind of pen and paper, and they did things in a very different way. You know, training was kind of throw you in, baptism by fire kind of thing. And stuff.
And what years is this? Like, so you started at Morton's at what year?
So this would be probably 92 or 93.
Okay.
Worked for them in their flagship in King of Prussia. At the time, they had an Italian concept called Bertolini's, which was all scratch, and so they wanted me to work there, and so I worked at their flagship in King of Prussia, which is just outside of Philly, and they decided that they had a troubled store here in Charlotte, right at Phillips Place, and so they decided that I would be a great fit for Charlotte. So moved to Charlotte, and just really loved Charlotte. And unfortunately, the restaurant was, you know, kind of at the end of its life cycle. Italian food, I've noticed, there's certain ethnic pockets that are great here in Charlotte, but Italian food doesn't seem to be one of them.
Okay.
You know, in Cleveland, it seems like you can't turn a corner without finding a great Italian restaurant with the, you know, the kind of checkerboard tables and you know, patent leather seats and that kind of thing. But here it wasn't really as popular, and you know, I think there was a lot of little, you know, Asian pockets and things like that. But in Cleveland, you know, Cleveland is a primarily immigrant-driven town,
City, yeah.
right? So there's a Polish section, and there's a German section, and there's an Italian section, and all
Interesting.
that. And so. Ended up closing. It's a funny story because, and I don't know the correlation, but the president of the company came in one day and said, you know, what are we going to do with this restaurant? And I said, look, you know, if you want me to be honest, throughout my career, I've always kind of had this problem with being too honest. And so I said, you know, honestly, I'd close it. I mean, it's, you know, we can keep trying, but we're past the peak of what we're ever going to be. And
How long were you at the store before, like, you maybe?
I was there probably a year and a half.
And then you just realized that you were trying everything you could.
Yeah.
To just you know, get it going, increase sales week to week, month to month, and
yeah, I mean, and you know, it was a chain restaurant, so you know, we were really good at all the scratch cooking. We made our own pasta, we made our own gelato, we made everything in house.
Wow.
And the restaurant was good. But at the time, the president of the company, John Benton, was a great guy. Really, one of these people, seminal figures in my life. Had a guy named James West, and he's really been an absolute mentor of mine over the years, and an old Fridays guy. And if you know anything about Fridays, it's like working for a cult, you know. I mean, those people are just they are just dyed in the wool, old time restaurant people, and it's really something to be a part of that. But worked for him for a while, and so I just said, look, I'd close it, and of course, next thing I know, they're closing that restaurant.
So you go from Chicago to Philly to Charlotte. You're here for a year and a half. Trying to revitalize the store.
Yep.
It's not happening. You know, so the president takes your suggestion.
Yep, closed it and sold it to Upstream. It became Upstream.
Okay.
And then, so by now I was hooked on the fact that, we didn't have these 8-month winters and gray skies and, cleaning off your car and all that stuff. So I said, well, I got to stay in the South because this is great. And that's when I got a job with Bubba Gump Shrimp Company.
Okay.
Worked for Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. Opened their Charleston location. Which
how did you make that connection? Did you know? Did you have?
Let me think. I forget how I made the. It was a recruiter.
Okay.
At that time, it was. It was a recruiter that I think we called each other or something. It's like not payphone.
Sure.
I don't think it was quite payphone time, but yeah, it was a recruiter, and they hired me, and so we had one of the smoothest openings that we had ever had
Nice.
with Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and so.
And what year is this?
This
Charleston location.
would probably be 95, I think.
Okay.
Maybe 96.
So middle '90s, you've been working. Working for mom and pop, dad.
Yep.
Now you've got some corporate experience.
Sure.
Kind of seeing how that's. And now you're opening stores.
Yeah, working for them was great, and at the time, Bubba Gump Shrimp Company had a very interesting sort of backstory. They used to run a bunch of restaurants that were very old style, pewter plates again, and those restaurants were on their way out, and so they really had no choice but to try to reinvent themselves, and the movie had come out, and so the story goes that one of the core members of the Rusty Pelican was the restaurant chain in California. Said, why don't we do a Bubba Gump Shrimp night? And so they called Paramount Pictures and said, hey, we really want to do this. And Paramount Pictures thought about it for a week and called back and said, not a problem, just write us out a check for $10,000 and you can do it. And they were like, well, you don't understand. $10,000 for one night in the restaurant business isn't gonna work.
So it was just a one night thing.
It was a one night thing. They were just trying to drum up some business because they were a seafood restaurant, and they thought, well, we can play off of this shrimp thing, and we can make it work and do some of the stuff that that they had heard about on the movie. And they said $10,000, and so they said, yeah, thanks. That's not going to work. But for some reason, and as the story goes, the lore of it, the secretary for the president of the company got a great idea and said, why don't you just build a restaurant around around the movie? And everybody, and nobody had ever thought. I mean, that was in those days nobody had thought of anything even remotely
or done that
like
before.
That.
Probably
never
right?
had been done. Right?
Yeah.
It was the days when Rainforest Cafe was popping up, and so there was a little bit of that kind of show business attached to it,
entertaining, dining.
Yeah, but it wasn't true to born to life yet. So. So the president said, "Yeah, well, this is great. I mean, he's got nothing to lose at this point, right? The movie's already in the done and it's out, and so there's no next step for it anyway. So they figured, well, let's just bring in the three biggest seafood let's bring in the biggest seafood companies that we can. So of course, Red Lobster was one of them, and Landry's was the other one. And then they said, well, let's just throw Rusty Pelican a bone because it was kind of their idea, and so." Let's set them up with it. And so Rusty Pelican at this point was, definitely on the downslide, right? It was that old style restaurant that just didn't have there was no next for it.
Yeah.
But they had prime real estate. I mean, just beautiful, wonderful locations. One in San Francisco right on the pier that was just absolutely breathtaking.
Sure.
And so they went all out, and they built a shrimp shack, and they, came up with the license plate. I don't know if you've ever eaten there, but the license plates are cool. And
the one in Gatlinburg, I've eaten at.
Okay, yeah. So the license plates say "Run Forest Run" or "Stop Forest Stop" or something. And that's how you got the attention of your server.
Sure.
Which is brilliant, because of the movie. It crosses over with the movie and all that business. But so they went.
That's on the table.
It's on the table. Yeah.
So it's a license plate on the table. For you guys kind of listening or watching.
Yeah.
Where if you want the waiter, you would put the
one that says the red one that says "Stop Forest Stop," and so everybody in the restaurant would just be keyed up on finding the red one, because that was our thing. Like as soon as we saw the red thing, like there would be 5 servers. It didn't matter whose table it was. And so they came up with all that kind of stuff, and working with that staff of very, very creative people and very, very smart people was a great help to my career. And I'll never forget working with those folks, because they were very, high gestalt people, just really high standards. And for a restaurant that makes fried shrimp, and, you wouldn't think that, but, we were hand breading and hand deveining and doing things that normally you wouldn't do.
Sure.
And I don't think they do to this day, but now, because things have changed so dramatically. But at the time, we put everything into it, and so it was pretty fun.
So just to recap, there's a seafood restaurant called Rusty Pelican.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't doing well. They have this crazy idea to piggyback off the movie.
Yep.
Right. The secretary, they and not even change the whole concept, just one night.
Right.
To have a Bubba Gump night.
Bubba Gump Shrimp Night. That was their idea. And
just to drum up some business. And so, I think this is cool, because businesses may have to take an evolution, may have to pivot. And so the secretary says, this story is insane.
Yeah.
The secretary says, why don't you open up a whole new restaurant? They bring in the top dogs. I think the Rusty Pelican ends up getting the deal.
Yeah, so Rusty Pelican did everything. They built a shrimp shack, and they did all these other
and it was at that first location in
in California.
Okay.
And I believe the first location that they did was in San Francisco, because they knew it was touristy, and they thought that
it makes sense.
Yeah, and so they were hoping to do, I think, $2 million or $2.5 million, and they ended up doing like $6.5 the first year.
Wow!
And that's when they knew that they had stumbled upon something. And it's true what you say, is that you may have the greatest idea and the greatest concept, and you talk to people that want to be in the restaurant business all the time, and they've got grandma's meatball recipe or whatever, and they think this is going to be the thing.
100%.
And, it happens all the time, and the reality is far different, because you need to find that niche that will bring them in, and then once you get them in, you've really got to blow their doors off with food quality and service quality and cleanliness and all the things that we've come to expect as standards for restaurants. And I think that it's important to think that way.
Sure. Do you remember, or do you know when they opened that first one?
So I have a feeling that it was in the the movie was in the early 90s, so I think it was mid 90s or very soon after the movie had come out, because there would be no reason to do a Bubba Gump Shrimp Night if the movie wasn't fresh.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense.
And so
piggyback off the excitement.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the date was. I'd have to kind of look it up, but yeah, it was really something else. And I think there's actually still one Rusty Pelican left. It's in like Santa Barbara or something, but it's right on the water, and they may have converted it to a Landry's or something else by now.
So it's mid-90s. You get recruited to go open up this Bubba Gump in Charleston.
Yeah.
And you're there for...
I was there really for about 6 or 8 months, and the chairman of the board of the company was a great guy, and he and his son and I had really hit it off, just as a kind of a friend connection, and he had this opportunity in Maui to do a restaurant right in Lahaina, which is kind of a small little fishing village that turns into a 200,000 person tourist attraction every year. But so he had an opportunity there, and there was a spot that they wanted, and he felt that Italian restaurant would be great there, and And so it was a brewery too, so it had all the brewery equipment. And at the time, they couldn't find a tenant, and so we took that space and started brewing beer. And this was well prior to the big craft brew explosion,
Sure.
right? And
the last 10 years has been absolutely
it's just been insane,
Yep.
right? And I wish I, had what I had 10 years later, but we had a great system, and we found a brewmaster that lived like up in the hills in Maui, and he would come down, and it's kind of this aging, I don't know, hippie guy but just very brilliant to be a brewer, you have to be a scientist. It's
Sure.
it's like baking bread, it's very much so much of this and so much of that, and there's not a lot of tinkering. Like in cooking, we kind of tinker around with stuff and we go, oh yeah, throw a little more salt, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not like that in brewing, but this guy was just fantastic at his job, and I tell the story a lot because I remember, I always wanted to close the restaurant, just partially because I was one of the owners. So the chairman of the board said, okay, let's buy this restaurant. We all went in on it together.
Sure.
Opened it up. Took $500,000 and opened the thing up, and did whatever we could to make this burgeoning business go. And we're kind of at the end of the tourist line. I remember we were like 2 doors down from Hard Rock Cafe, and so we thought, oh, this is going to be great. This is awesome. And started brewing beer, and we made a pretty good go of it. And I would love to close that restaurant at night, not only because I was responsible for the people, but at the end of the night when everything's closed and cleaned, and I could just pour a beer and walk home, because I lived another 500 yards down the beach. And
Nice.
So Maui was quite an experience. And one thing that I would say that I learned most about doing a business like that is just know everything you can know about the location. And the state laws are very different from state to state, right? So in Hawaii, it's mandated that if you work 15 hours a week for an employer, that you have to be covered with health insurance, and it's half paid by the employer. Now, the insurance rates were low at the time. I think it was like $120 a person, but if you can imagine, every server, every busboy, everybody gets covered, and so there's a lot of burden there, and then the cost of electricity, the cost of energy in Hawaii was extremely high.
Wow.
And so those are things that I didn't know about before. You don't think about it until you're confronted with it, and then it's too late. And so you
got $500,000 invested.
Yeah, it makes it really difficult to kind of shift on the fly. Like, what do you do for power if power is $10,000 a month? It makes it hard. So we struggled a lot with that, but we made a good go of it, and we were in the $2 to $2.5 million a year range, and sort of building on it, and really what we found was that the locals were really supportive of it. And in Hawaii, if the locals support you, then everybody works in the tourism industry, so they're all touching tourists all day long, and so they send people our way. And,
nice.
And so everything was going great, and then we opened up another restaurant that was called Lucarelli's, and they just because it was an Italian place and they wanted to use my name, and I thought, well, that's kind of that's kind of opportunist. But then they showed me the sign, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of like that. That's a cool sign. It was like a neon, and it said my name, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, you were digging it.
Yeah, I was in it. And so everything was kind of going well, and then 9/11 hit, and after 9/11, most people don't recall this, but I think people in Hawaii would remember it, and especially people in Maui would remember it. The flights were all shut down. So right after 9/11, anybody that was on the island couldn't leave, essentially.
Stayed there.
Yeah. And so then they kind of shut down these long-range flights, and then everything pretty much contracted in terms of, the tourism business. And in Hawaii, it's kind of like Honolulu fills up first, and then the outer islands collect everything after that, and so it took a very long time. I remember, going from like 40,000 a week in sales to down to 15.
Oh my gosh!
And so
overnight, just like that.
Yeah, just overnight, and it was brutal, and it was sad, and it was difficult, and if you've ever closed a restaurant before, or you build a camaraderie with people. And one thing that's true about the restaurant business, I think more than anything else, is there's these sets of comrades that you work with, and people that, especially in line cooks, because we get all these tickets and we're all working together, and it's a great synergy and a great team, and it's one of those things that I think most people and younger people don't get, is that I think everybody wants to kind of have an idea of what they want in their life, but that camaraderie is something that's very special. I think it's very unique to have friends like that you can count on, and of course
it's a family.
It is a family, and of course in the restaurant business, after work everybody kind of goes out together and
sure.
And hangs out, and so that was something that I was hooked on that from a very early age, because I just loved line cooking that way. But yeah, so that's kind of where that went.
So I'm assuming you guys had to close down?
Yeah, we had to close the restaurant down because
both of them, the Lucarellis and the
yeah, one would not really be able to function without the other. It was
gotcha.
the one in Honolulu was more, the Lucarellis was more of a kind of a smaller fast casual type of
gotcha.
Arrangement, but yeah, so we shut it down, and it was sad, and say goodbye to the staff and all that kind of stuff, but it's a learning process. It's one of those things that you just learn a lot. And I've always said this to anybody who's considering getting into business. When you're considering getting into business, it's a beautiful, wonderful, happy, joyous time, and everybody's going to be rich and everything's going to be great.
Sure.
But what I tell them is prepare for the divorce. Make sure that if the worst thing happens and it doesn't go off, make sure that you're protected to understand what the next step would be when that does happen, because our business is that way, and it fails more often than you would think. And I don't know what the statistics are, but I know if somebody told me, I would tell them that it's very accurate. And everybody thinks it's really easy to run a restaurant, and it can be if you have the right set of circumstances, but it can be a very, very difficult venture too.
And even in this scenario, this was a incident out of your control.
Sure.
Right? I mean, 9/11, nobody wanted it. I remember being a sophomore in high school and remember exactly where I was, what happened, and so you have to gotta have some plans, even if external forces. You have to be able to pivot and make adjustments. And have kind of the thick skin that, hey, just because this concept failed, you're not a failure. The concept failed.
Yeah.
Right. It's fine.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because you can get down on yourself that way real easily. And I think that, most people, when they take a beating like that, kind of go, oh, well, never again. Right.
Yeah.
But the people who have the passion and the people who really have it, stuck in their blood, always rise back, and they rise back a little bit stronger, and that's kind of the way that the things went for me. But it is a hard time. I mean, it's hard because you feel like, especially you have to leave Maui.
Yeah.
So for me, thankfully I bought some real estate when I got there, but had I not, I would have been in big trouble. But I ended up running a dive shop for like 2 years, as long as I possibly could, and my wife kind of looked at me and went, you're not going to be running this dive shop forever.
Yeah, this isn't the plan.
This is not how this is going to go, right? And so we moved back to.
No, it's a good point, because I feel like failure. The opposite of success is not failing; it's quitting. Mm-hmm. And you will have failures along the way that you need to learn from and make adjustments and pivot. And just because one store or one concept didn't make it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try again. Now, get some coaching, find a mentor, see how you can adjust. But, it's like John Maxwell. I think he's got a book that says sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. Yeah. And that's... And
that is a very good point, because, once burned, you either fold up and die, or you figure out, well, I'm not going to do that again, or here's, it's a humbling experience, because especially for chefs, people who are chefs generally think that they're that they've got everything figured out. And as a general rule, They do, but there are so many other variables that you have to factor in that are so much more difficult. And a lot of restaurants are, being in the right place at the right time and then honing your craft from there. And, I always tell people to try to be like the iceberg that moves forward 2 steps and then back 1 and, just keep pushing
Slow
forward.
progression.
Keep
Slow progression.
better.
Have good habits. I'm reading a book right now called Atomic Habits. And the first few chapters, that's what it talks about. It's just slow, methodical habits that once put in place will yield success down the road. It's not one thing it's just good habits, having good service, being clean, being diligent, having a consistent product, right? Mm-hmm. And so, so how's the transition happen? So dive shop, a couple of years, your wife looks at you and says, David,
we got to go.
This isn't it, okay?
Yeah. So...
Any kids at this point or no?
I had my 3rd child in Maui. So these kids now, all they know is beautiful weather and walking down the beach and picking mangoes and papayas off trees. It's just an entirely different life.
What a life!
Yeah, it really is. It's funny because I always tell people you move to Hawaii and the thing that you don't ever do anymore is go to movies. You never go to a theater because why would you want to be inside? Or
100%. That makes sense.
Our entertainment was always let's go to the beach and
hang
swim
out.
around and
surf, do whatever. Yeah.
So I came back to Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and so this was kind of an interesting thing because the chairman of the board did this project outside of the corporate.
Okay.
Right? So now I'm kind of in this weird place where it's like.
Where have you been? What's been going on?
But I'm not. They knew me because there was a Bubba Gump Shrimp Company actually that was right across the street. And interestingly enough, that guy Chris Pratt was working as a waiter there at the time, and so we all knew each other at Bubba Gump. Because the way it works in Hawaii, especially in Lahaina, is that everybody knows everybody. There's only 20,000 people in the town, so we're all trading shifts and back and forth and that kind of stuff. But so I went back to Bubba Gump Shrimp Company and said, look, is there any spot for me? I'd like to move back to the mainland. Thinking there's got to be a spot in California or something and they said no, we're gonna open this new concept. In Chicago, and it was sort of the beginning of the quick serve revolution. I remember Panera was marginally popular at the time. It was just kind of starting, and
so this is mid 2000s, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they opened up a restaurant that was Italian quick serve, and it was basically pizzas, pastas, and salads.
Okay.
Each one had a kind of a different station, wood stone oven, and all that. And so they had me do the food for the concept and really kind of birthed that concept along with all of the executive staff from Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, who at this point now had grown their empire to the point where they were looking to find some subset of businesses that they could grow to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so did that for a while.
How'd you feel about going to Chicago after?
I loved it. I was really excited about it because I originally was from there, and and my wife actually worked at Hard Rock Cafe way back in the. I'm not gonna say how long ago, but it was before Hard Rock was a household name, and so. We were excited about Chicago, and we had some family that lived there, and so it was great. My kids got there, and I remember dramatically they were so excited to go play in the snow that we bundled them up and we got them all ready, and they went. And in Chicago, the snow is 3 feet tall, 3 feet high, and they're out there. And we open the door, and they run out, and they weren't out there for 5 minutes before they were like, they
got tired of it.
We don't like this. This is not for us. This snow thing, it's not good.
Coming from Hawaii to Chicago now, it's like
was not happening. So my wife said, "Well, we really liked Charlotte, and Charlotte was great. Why don't we go back to Charlotte?" And I said, "Well, I'll look, but it's kind of hard from Chicago to Charlotte." Managed to find a job in Charleston. Worked in Charleston for a while, and so kind of back to Charleston type of thing. And worked for a company down there that was good experience, and then got a job offer in Charlotte, back in Charlotte at the Quaker Steak and Lube, which was opened right what used to be. I forget what it used to be, Speedway Boulevard, but now I think it's Bruton Smith.
Yep. I know exactly where that's at.
Yeah, so they had a Quaker Steak and Lube was basically a chicken wing restaurant out of Sharon, Pennsylvania. And when I was in college, we used to go there all the time. And so chicken wings back when I was in college were not like they are now, ubiquitous, right?
Sure.
But so I was familiar with the concept, and it was a automotive oriented concept, and I thought, well, it's got to be great in Concord, right? Because the Speedway's right here, so it's be awesome.
NASCAR, the whole thing. I mean, literally the Speedway's down the street,
right down the street. Yeah. So we would do these Wednesday bike nights, and we'd get all these 1,000 bikes, and motorcycle people love to show off their bikes, and we would have bands, and it was just a great Wednesday party, and I really enjoyed that. And so we expanded that brand to Tennessee, and then to another location here in Charlotte. And
how many stores did you guys have?
I was over 3 of them at the time.
Okay. And the whole company had more in other areas?
Yeah, I think at the time there was about 15 locations. There's still quite a few of them.
Okay.
They've struggled with the concept that, wings used to be kind of the byproduct and were really cheap, and wings are not cheap anymore. So I think they've struggled a little bit with that, but there's still good restaurant. The one in Sharon is just, I think if anybody ever gets to Sharon, PA, it's worth checking out. There's this thing that used to be called 3 by the Sea, I believe. But anyway, there's 3 restaurants. The one that really kind of made it was Quaker Steak and Lube, and it was, just a play off of the Quaker State name, and they served a lot of wings and beer, and so it was great. But yeah, I worked for them for a while, and then started, their business kind of changed into sort of a resort management thing. And so I would go and manage these resorts that were in receivership, which was a really interesting job, right? Okay. So the bank would say, look, this resort didn't make it. Let's send in the management team just to keep the fires burning, because, we want to sell it. But, there's kind of a lot of legal things that had to happen and all that stuff. So I would go, and I remember one place in Minnesota, particularly a golf course in Minnesota. It was the craziest thing. I mean, because the golf season's not very long.
I was going to say, it's a short little season there.
Yeah, it's not long.
Handful of months,
yeah. But these people in Minnesota, and this is in a place called Mille Lacs, which is even north. I think it's an hour and a half or 2 hours north of Minneapolis, and so it's cold, and so they owned a bunch of properties that were rental houses, and that kind of, it was that kind of resort, and so there was that to manage. But the people of Minnesota, I tell people this all the time. The people of Minnesota that live in that area are the nicest, the most friendly people you've ever met, and it was really kind of an interesting experience. So that turned into managing water park. I managed a water park for a while that had a 375-room hotel attached to it, which was an absolute experience. And so, I think throughout my career, what started off as, gosh, I really love being a line cook and really love food, and love being a chef and all that, turns into a bunch of different things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I think it's important to keep your eyes open when you're in your career, and do what you love and love what you do. And if you do that, then I think everything's going to kind of work itself out. And it may not seem like it at the time, but eventually it does work out.
Nice. So I guess let's just do some final wrap up thoughts. I mean, what are your any suggestions to anybody out there that maybe is new to the industry, maybe would like to own a business or a food truck or a catering company or any business for that matter, landscape, dry cleaners. Is there, what, from your experience, all your, I know we've said a lot of things, I know we've dropped the word mentorship, we dropped the word due diligence on doing your homework before you open up a business in a certain city or state or whatever. And so, Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think my experience with Sabor has been interesting in that we really try to offer a pathway to some type of success and some type of a career.
Sure.
It's one thing to hire people that are 18 or 19 years old and put them in a cashier job and they make their money and then they go home, but offering the opportunity or at least the pathway for something different and to provide that opportunity in such a way that it's merit-based and it's instructional and all that, to me is one of the greatest joys that I have. In our business, it's easy to find people to work. It's rare to find people that you kind of go, oh yeah, this person has it. Once you find that person, you have to have an opportunity for them 100%. And you have to coach them and you have to mentor them. And if ever in your life you've ever been mentored or coached or had some kind of impactful experience from some other human being, draw from that strength and draw from that experience, because that is the thing that binds us all together, and it gives everybody the leg up and the next chance to get to the next thing, which gets you to the next thing. And I can't stress that enough. The workforce is so much different today than it was before. Being in a position of trying to attract and hire great people and explain what hospitality is, and get them to understand that people have choices, and they make choices based on a number of different variables. But
sure.
But that type of mentorship and that type of can do attitude is just critically important to me. I love that part of it. I love nothing more than seeing employees that we hire to turn into something that's far more successful than they had originally hoped for.
Absolutely. Well, David, it was awesome. It was a pleasure. Awesome having you on as a guest. And so, episode 7 in the books. I think this was good. I think this was really awesome. You have which is why I even wanted you on the podcast, is your story, just places you've worked, things you've learned, experiences, locations. I think people can draw from that and learn and apply it into their life. And so, anyway, super excited about this podcast. Good luck to you, with Sabor and everything that you guys are doing and touching. You guys are definitely a heavy hitter here in Charlotte, and it sounds like, expanding in the surrounding areas. And so, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I thanks for having me. I really think that, with regard to Sabor, our goal is to provide something that the others aren't, and that Latin street food experience is real, and it's a nice blend of culinary and quick serve restaurant, and I think it's pretty powerful.
So awesome. Well, appreciate you guys. You guys check out David and Sabor. Try out one of his locations, and so appreciate you guys listening. And if you guys haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel or check this out on our podcast. To do that, give us a comment, like us, share with some friends that you think would enjoy business ownership and entrepreneurship in the food service industry. And so anyway, with that, it's a wrap. Thank you so much.